Hey everyone, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video I'm reviewing the Vincent Audio SV-228 hybrid integrated amplifier. Now this amplifier is available in black or silver aluminum and it retails for $2,500. This amp was sent to me by Vincent Audio. It won't affect what I say about the review, but I always share that information for full disclosure. I reviewed the Vincent Audio SV-500 in the past and loved that amplifier, so frankly I'm pretty excited to have another Vincent product in the listening room. But with that being said, let's move on. So the hybrid integrated name refers to how this amplifier is designed. It basically uses tubes on the preamp stage and solid state on the output stage. The goal of a hybrid integrated amplifier is to give you some of the unique tonal characteristics to a tube system, but without necessarily having the same drawbacks of power delivery, overheating, reliability, etc. So they use solid state on the output stage. The other benefit of that is the amp doesn't run as hot or consume as much power, and of course, like I said, it'll be more reliable. Now this is actually kind of similar to the SV500 I reviewed in the past. The SV500 retails for $1,300 and it has a lot less power. It's basically 50 watt times 2 at 8 ohms and 80 watts times 2 at 4, whereas this one is 100 watts times 2 at 8 ohms and 180 watts times 2 at 4. The overall design is very similar. In fact, they're both inspired by an older Vincent Audio amplifier, so when you pop the cover, they look very similar. It's just beefed up. Opening the chassis reveals an absolutely massive power supply on the SV-228, which is important because that's basically the foundation of any amplifier. So having a big power supply is helpful for music production and performance. To the right of that, you have a large heatsink for the output stage, which consists of 4 C5-198 and 4 A1941 Toshiba transistors. It's basically the same design as the SV500 I reviewed before, but with double the amount of transistors. It's actually the same exact transistors, there's just 4 of each instead of 2 of each. The two preamp stage is upgraded as well, featuring a single 6N4 and a dual ECC82 matched tube pair from PS Fame. The ECC82 tube name is the same as a 12AU7 tube. It basically just depends on if you're looking at a European or US spec tube, but they are interchangeable. The tubes are of course replaceable. There's no special soldering or anything like that. So if they ever fail, or if you want a tube roll to see how it impacts the sound, obviously make sure you get the right spec, but they are easily replaced following the standard tube replacement procedures. Now, if you look inside the front of the chassis, you'll see a separate logic board, and that's handling all of your controls from the front panel, which includes your volume input selection, your VU meters, etc. The SV-228 has a stepping motor on the volume wheel because this is an analog volume. There's a hard stop at max volume. If you adjust the volume using the included remote, you will see the volume wheel move, and that's because there's a stepping motor inside, just like the SV500. Now, if you have this, let's say at 80% on large speakers like the Alta Audio Atoms behind me, you will hear a little bit of a noise from the stepping motor moving the volume wheel. That's if no music is playing. It's quiet enough where if you actually have a song playing, you won't pick up on that. If the idea of adjusting the volume and adding any kind of a noise bothers you, then you can always get up and interact with the volume knob directly, and that won't generate any noise whatsoever. One of the unique things I did not expect to see on the SV-228 is the RGB settings on the VU meter. Now, it's not full RGB where you can pick any one of 16 million colors, for example. There's a little switch on the back. And if I go, you can see the white right here. I'll flick the switch, then you can see the red, then there's blue, and then there's green. There's no way to turn the VU meter off that I'm aware of, but there are standard 4-pin connections for the VU meters inside to do the RGB control. So it's RGB plus ground. So if you are a type of person that likes to modify expensive equipment like this, I'm not saying to do this, but I'm sure someone crazy out there could resolder it and put a standard RGB controller on there if you want to do your own unique color. Otherwise, just leave it alone and use the switch on the back. I just have to say that because I also cover gaming stuff, and I know people are into the whole RGB thing. It's standard, but the switch at least gives you 4 options. I prefer the white because it's a more classic look and it matches my source gear. I was kind of into the blue for a while because it matched my PS Audio amp, but I usually only used one at a time. So pick which one you like. Otherwise, to me, I just stick with the white. Now the front panel gives you the controls you typically expect. You have a power button, you have volume, you have input selection. There's even a speaker switch because this can power 2 speakers or 2 sets of speakers at a time. On that note, if you are powering 2 pairs of speakers, they have to be 8 ohms. You can't run 2 pairs of 4 ohms because the total impedance will be too low. However, what is unique, or not, I shouldn't say unique, but another special feature of the SV-228 is the tone button. Enabling the tone will now give you the ability to adjust bass and treble via 2 separate dials. If you defeat tone or disable it, it bypasses that part of the board altogether, preserving the same frequency response of the analog signal coming in. It's basically leaving it untouched. So if you don't need EQ, make sure you leave the tone control off, and everything coming in through your analog connection can then be sent out to your speakers unscathed. Now this does have a Burr Brown DAC on the digital side, so if you're using the optical or coaxial input, you can do that. And again, if you want to bypass everything on the front, leaving the tone control off will affect that too. There's also a loudness button, which changes some of the dynamics in the sound profile just a little bit to kind of, I guess, change the way the audio is perceived by the listener to make it sound more dynamic and robust. I typically leave all of that stuff off unless you find a song is lacking bass or treble, for example, or it has too much. You can always adjust it with that to kind of fine tune it, but that's more of a personal preference thing. I don't want to say it's right or not to use it or not use it. Now, I'm not 100% sure what the output impedance is of the headphone jack. Plugging in a headphone will disable the amplifier, but they rate their headphone jack for 32 to 600 ohms. Going below that, they feel or suggest that it could damage the amplifier. So again, I'm not sure what the output impedance is. I typically don't use an internal headphone jack on an amplifier like this. I'd always recommend buying a dedicated one because even for $100 to $200, you'll typically benefit from that. Now, on that note, the back of this amplifier has two output options. You have the pre-out and record out. Record out is a fixed output that is not being impacted by the preamp or the phono preamp stage, the tube preamp stage. So if you don't want this to basically do anything to the sound, you can use the record output, and it's basically serving as a giant input selector. However, if you use the pre-out is variable, and that gives you a couple benefits. It's impacted by the tube preamp stage, so if you want to, let's say, listen to headphones on a headphone amp, you can run the RCA to your headphone amp, and now you're benefiting from the unique sound that these tubes have. It also works if you're using two smaller speakers and you want to add a subwoofer. You can send the full range output with a variable volume to a subwoofer. So make sure if you do add a sub, it has its own crossover system, and then you'd want to dial in that crossover to better match whatever speakers you have paired to it. Now, if you go to source 6 or input 6 on this, that is a main input, and that's expecting a preamp. So if you have a variable input source coming from another receiver or DAC, for example, with adjustable volume, you would want it connected to that. Don't send something like a phono preamp to it because you basically have no volume control for the most part. That's not the safest thing to do. Use the other inputs if you are sending something like a phono preamp stage to it. Now, the sound quality of the SV-228 is nothing short of special. It has an innate ability to make your speakers sound larger or more grand than they are. And if I were to use an analogy, I'll start with something like using your phone. And if you take a picture with your phone and go to edit it later, and it might seem a little bit more dull, it's accurate, but it doesn't pop. You go to the color, saturation, or vibrance settings, and you boost it up a little bit. You're not changing the colors of the picture. You're not making the whole picture look blue or pink or whatever you're doing. You're enhancing the color to bring it out more, make it more bold. And that's what the SV-228 does. It's just taking what you have and somehow making it seem more alive and more forward, but across the board. It's not just addressing your mid-range. Everything just seems more forward. It's the same as having a nice steak or some dinner entree and you're putting a little salt on it just to enhance the flavors. So it has a very tasteful way of modifying and improving the sound. Now, analogies aside, I think it's important to start considering speaker to amp pairing when you get to these price levels. And the SV-228 has just the slightest hint of warmth. I already mentioned how it kind of brings the music a little bit more forward. And the soundstage, I don't want to say it's a holographic virtual soundstage, but it does have its own unique presentation of imaging and layering. And it's not something you get on a very neutral sounding amp. So to put that in perspective, I reviewed the PS Audio Stellar Strata integrated amplifier in the past. It's a $3,000 amplifier, and I liked it a lot. I ended up purchasing it after the review was done, so I didn't have to send it back. It's actually behind me over there. So I bought the Stellar Strata because I found it incredibly neutral. It didn't really do anything to the sound, but it didn't hurt it either. It stayed very true and very flat. And I wanted to have that as a benchmark to compare amplifiers like this that tend to add their own little special sauce, or maybe don't provide anything extra either, and that's okay. It's just to help give me perspective. And When you get into that level of performance, at this power level and cost, depending on what speaker you have, you might get varied results and it might not sound as different, or it'll be drastic. Now behind me I have the Alta Audio Atom speakers, which are $19,000 a pair. They are gorgeous speakers. I'll be reviewing those in the coming weeks or within a month. I love the speakers. They have incredibly deep bass. They have this transmission light system, so you get bass down in the 30 hertz region without a subwoofer. Along with that mid-range and that giant AMT, it just has an insane ability to reproduce live music at home in a sense of grandness that most speakers don't touch. It's a very special speaker. And because of that, it doesn't necessarily need source equipment or amplification to do anything overly special to change that. Usually speakers like that benefit from just high levels of clean, zero distortion, neutral power. The SV-228 has a lot of power. It's a great amplifier, in my opinion, for up to like the 80% mark. What it does to the music is more special from a day-to-day listening experience when it comes to music, when you're not being a critic of your own music or gear. If you're the person who loves to just listen to music, that's what the SV-228 does in a special way. It just has this crazy ability to have fun brought back to the music and energy and stuff that certain amplifiers that can measure well but might be too neutral or dark seem to lack from like a soul perspective. And it's more noticeable on a different speaker. And I'll give two examples because I remember this historically from my older testing. I have the Bowers & Wilkins 606 S2 bookshelf speakers. Fairly, brighter sounding treble. It's a little bit detached from the mid-range. There's kind of like a little scoop where the crossover point is, but I love that speaker presentation. It's just a blast to listen to music on it. Has a nice bright British sound, if you will. And on the Stellar Strata, which is very neutral, it didn't do anything special to those. They still sound great, but they sound close to how I guess they were intended to sound. What becomes more apparent is when you connect the Vincent Audio SV-228 to those, now my 606 bookshelf speakers sound larger than they are. They seem more powerful. They seem more full. And I feel like I'm missing less of the energy that the music should have had. So, and that was more apparent on the DefTech Definitive Technology D9 and D11 bookshelves because I bought those before. Different amplifiers, honestly, that speaker needs some pizzazz and energy, or to me they sounded way too neutral. They image incredibly well, but they sound kind of dead unless you really turn them up. And the Vincent SV-500, which has a very similar sound signature to this, was like a match made in heaven with that speaker. And as soon as I went to a pure solid state, like a Denon amplifier, for example, they did not sound the same. And I did not like that speaker that much. And because of that, I ended up switching to the Bowers speakers, which add a little bit of their own flair. So I say all this not to confuse you, but to show you or explain that your mileage may vary depending on what you listen to, your ears, and what speakers they're connected to. One thing that is consistent, though, is Vincent does have a special sound. And I think anyone that's heard the Vincent amplifier, when you A/B it to something else, it stands out as a fun musical presentation that just seems to have this energy and soul behind the music that you don't often get with other gear. Now to close, I don't think the SV-228 is going to be for everybody, and that's okay. That's what's nice about this industry and having such a huge selection of products, especially when you get to $2,500, because there could be a $1,000 amplifier that does more of what you need. This does not have a USB-C DAC. It does not have a network streamer to cast music through direct play like Spotify or Tidal Connect, things like that. What it does is it's providing you, I don't want to say a vintage sound because I don't want to use that as a detractor and make it seem like you're missing some resolution or, a certain level of dynamics and stuff. But it has a way of presenting music in a sense that you don't normally get in solid state amps in this price range. Some people don't want that. Some people may find that you're just missing something. If you have a lot of gear and you've gone through several amplifiers and they all sound the same to you, or you feel like just something's missing in your system and you can't quite put your finger on it, aside from room treatment, this is the type of product that I would experiment with because it does have something special to it. It's a special sauce. It's the Vincent sound, and that's why I like these amps so much. So with that being said, I hope you found the review helpful and you learned a little bit something new about an amplifier today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you in a future video. And with that being said, I'll see you next time. Bye.